And we'll just give our participants a few moments to enter the room. And good day, everyone. Welcome to the QEM Heroes webinar series. I'm Christine Wood, and I serve as the Assistant Program Director for the Heroes Fellows Program at QEM. And for more than 30 years, QEM has been a national catalyst for STEM education transformation and research capacity building. Currently, the QEM network serves nearly 900 colleges and universities and reaches more than 8,000 individuals nationwide. This webinar is part of the HEROES initiative. The HEROES program brings together researchers with experience in the federal government to lend their expertise and support to the STEM research and education communities. Our fellows are here to provide tools and tips for navigating the funding landscape, developing STEM programs and partnerships, and improving talent retention in in-demand fields. We hope this series promotes engagement with our HEROES fellows and provides valuable resources to our participants. The webinar recordings and slides will be available in the QEM Resource Hub. By attending this webinar, you will soon be added to the QEM network and granted access to the hub. And I'm so happy to introduce our HEROES fellows today. Dr. Sharmini Pitter-Boghos holds a PhD in Environmental Earth System Science and Archaeology from Stanford. Her experiences in STEM workforce development with minority serving institution includes 8 years at Florida A&M University as the Assistant Director of the NOAA Center for Coastal and Marine Ecosystems and Interim Director of the Florida Georgia Lewis Stokes Alliance for Minority Participation. With expertise in science-informed program strategy, science diplomacy, federal grant management, and community engagement, she is committed to building inclusive ecosystems where science serves society through trust, transparency, and transformative partnerships. And Dr. Jennifer Riehl is an environmental scientist and policy professional with experience in multidisciplinary collaboration, federal grants management, and developing collaborative environmental science and land management policy strategies. She has expertise in forestry and community genetics, wildfire science, data science, environmental policy, and public outreach. And so, without further ado, I'd like to turn the floor over to our presenters today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christine. Welcome, everyone. Before we get into the main presentation on the NSF merit review process, we have a few housekeeping notes. If you need closed captioning, you can turn on captions by clicking the More button and selecting the option Show Captions. The slides of this presentation and the recording will be available on the QEM Resource Hub. We would also like to share a disclaimer that all views expressed in this presentation are the presenter's own personal views only. We do not represent NSF, the federal government, QEM, or anyone else. The views expressed do not constitute official advice or guidance and are based on our own experiences and research. To get us started, we're going to launch a brief poll to get to know more about you, the audience. So with this poll, please let us know your current role and if you've attended a webinar with Jennifer and I before. We've included a list of our previous and upcoming webinars in our series on the right here.
And we'll give participants a few more moments to answer this poll.
Okay. So you should be able to see the results now. We have quite a few faculty and administrative staff and a few in other roles. And many of you have not attended one of our webinars in the past, so we welcome newcomers, and we're so glad you could join us today. And thank you to those of you who have attended our previous webinars. We hope you'll all be able to join us for our next webinar in July, where we will be reviewing the latest National Science Board Merit Review Report for a changing research landscape. You may be aware that recent changes to the NSB membership have taken place, and we'll hopefully be able to include updates to the state of the National Science Board during that webinar in July. So today we will cover a brief history of the merit review process at the U.S. National Science Foundation. We will provide an overview of the current review criteria and go over what you can expect if you decide to participate as a reviewer and as a proposer. We will then open it up for Q&A and provide additional resources. I will now turn it over to Jennifer to start us off with the history of the merit review process.
Thanks, Sharmini. So I put together a non-exhaustive exploration of what I felt were important developments in the way the U.S. National Science Foundation, or NSF, as I'll refer to it from this point forward, has approached reviewing proposal submissions for funding opportunities. So in the next few slides, I'm going to break down this timeline that is shown on the slide right now and talk about their connections in more detail. I put this one here so that you could see the timeline as a whole on one slide. All right. So before I jump in, let's just remind ourselves of what the purpose of NSF was and is, as it was described in the National Science Foundation Act of 1950, which is what founded the organization. Congress called for the NSF to promote the progress of science, advance the national health, prosperity, and welfare, and to secure the national defense. And at the time, what NSF represented was pretty revolutionary. They decided to award grants instead of contracts, which is what most federal science agencies at the time did. And then they also chose to use external peer review, and the agency's first annual report emphasized how important the collaboration between NSF and the scientific community was for the agency to fulfill its mission. And that's exemplified in the top right corner with a quote from that annual report that the NSB chairman at the time, Chester Barnard, said the collaboration of the scientific community is indispensable. And he basically spends like the first 2 pages of that report talking about how important this relationship is. So that's kind of the context of where, this all started. They needed to establish some peer review criteria to ensure quality science was being funded, but also to help decide how to go about funding only a fraction of the proposals that were deemed worthy of support. So the main criteria in 1951 focused on the intellectual merit of the proposed work with some extra guidance on what reviewers should consider in terms of the context the research would take place in. And then by 1967, this simple peer review criterion had been expanded into 5 that clarified the importance of both the scientific merit and the benefits to society, which at the time included education and technological benefits. Then in 1974, they were further expanded to be more responsive to an increasing number of grants that supported applied research, as well as more inclusive criteria for proposal evaluation, which partially came about because there was an amendment to the NSF charter in 1968 called the Daddario Amendment, and it explicitly included applied research in NSF's charter. So it was kind of like building up more criteria. Then they did a reduction to 4 criteria in 1981, and that was a response to the changing structure of NSF. Prior to this time, they had kind of been building like this applied research focus, but it was kind of not concentrated anywhere specific. And so what ended up happening in the 80s was that they formed the engineering directorate. And they needed to create some more flexible criteria that would also more explicitly address broader impacts, because that was also the year that Congress explicitly called for broadening participation in the Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act of 1981. So let's go to our next time frame. So We're still in the 1980s. In 1986, they did their first major reexamination of the peer review process, and that was carried out through an NSF advisory committee on merit review. That was the name of the committee. The major changes that happened after their assessment was that they renamed the process from peer review to merit review. And the main reason why they did that, as they described, was because they thought that that name reflected the process of evaluating proposals with technical and non-technical criteria more holistically. So then we go to 1993, and that's the year that the Government Performance and Results Act was passed. And it required an assessment of the merit review process, again, only this time with explicit engagement from the scientific community. And there was a study that was published in 1997 as a result of that assessment. That report is the one that established the two criteria that we know today, intellectual merit and broader impacts. And this shift to a simpler, more flexible criteria was in response to the increasingly diversifying research and education landscape at the time. So in 2007, NSF recognized the importance of transformative research. And as they define it on their website, it's challenging current understanding, or providing pathways to new frontiers in science and engineering is what transformative research is defined by NSF. So this edition was an outcome of recommendations from a 2004 task force. And it's notable that this report also evaluated the NSF merit review process compared to what other agencies, both in the US and other places in the world, were doing at the time, and noted it as an international gold standard for review of science and engineering research proposals. So let's go to our next time, which is going to be our last part of the timeline. So we're moving to 2010 now, and the passage of the America Competes Reauthorization Act. And the major change that happened with that is that it essentially codified broader impacts. The act directly asked the agency to achieve a specific array of societal goals, and there were 7 of them, and I've listed all 7 of them here so that you can see what they are. You've probably heard these before, but this is where they come from, the American Competes Reauthorization Act. So increasing economic competitiveness, advancing the health and welfare of the American public, supporting national defense, enhancing partnerships between academia and industry, developing a globally competitive STEM workforce, improving public scientific literacy and engagement, and expanding participation of women and individuals from underrepresented groups in STEM. So a lot of this is just in response to the way the scientific landscape is changing over time. Work is getting more collaborative and more interdisciplinary, and there's also been multiple assessments over the past decade looking at how can they better address the broader impacts part of the criteria. Then we're going to move to 2020. NSB releases a strategic roadmap then. And they're addressing increasing concerns about the US falling behind in science and research education globally. And they also propose what's needed to change that trajectory. And then shortly after that, in 2022, the CHIPS and Science Act is passed, and that directs the NSB to conduct a new merit review assessment with particular focus on how the broader impacts criterion is applied and how the process may be improved. And kind of part of the reason why that assessment was probably asked for specifically for broader impacts is because between 2010 and 2020, there were a number of studies that came out kind of assessing how well broader impacts was being addressed and how clear the directions were for people to write them. And the answers were kind of no, they're not always consistently noted and not always available because it's not always in the publicly available abstracts, but then also that some of this is because it's unclear exactly how to assess broader impacts as well as report on them. And so that's kind of where that assessment came into play. And that's why it's focusing on broader impacts. And that report is the merit review for a changing landscape. And we're going to be talking about the results of that report, or really what's in that report, on our July 7th webinar. So if you're interested to hear more about what they're recommending in that report, the changes they're suggesting, and then also just kind of, a what's going on with the NSB. Feel free to register for that. There's a link directly on this page. And then you could always go to the QEM events page to find webinars to register for, including this one. So that leads us to our last event on the timeline for now. So in late 2025, they released that merit review for Changing Landscape, which I just mentioned. And aside from the suggestions that they're making about improving the communication of how to interpret and apply the criteria in the review process, particularly broader impacts, they're also suggesting that broader impacts be renamed to societal impacts to better reflect what it can cover. So that's just like a little preview of what that's about. And I hope that you found this exploration of the merit review criteria evolution as interesting as I did when I was doing the research, and that you take away from this how the main tenets of proposal evaluation for NSF have been very consistent over the years. Intellectual merit's been a big part of that, and but there's always been a concern for what the societal benefit is of the research that's funded by NSF as well, and that's kind of changed over time to the point where we're now considering those two things equally, or attempting to at least. And I think the other thing to note is that there's been this continual iterative process of evaluating how the merit review criterion are working, how aligned they are with what the science research landscape looks like, and then making adaptations to improve it over time. So that's also another throwback to how connected this process has been and continues to be with the scientific community. So I'm going to turn it back over to Sharmini now, and she's going to talk about the current merit review criteria as well as what it's like to participate in this process as a reviewer.
Thank you, Jennifer. So now that we understand the history of developing the merit review process, we can take a closer look at the current state of merit review. We'll start with launching our second poll. In this poll, please let us know if you have participated in the NSF review process before. We'll go ahead and launch that. We'll give you a couple moments to complete that poll. Okay. And let's take a look at the results. So most of you have not participated in this process before, so hopefully we can provide you with a good overview. And for those of you who have participated, either as a reviewer or proposer, we hope we can provide additional or updated information to you today. And this should be a good overview for everyone. So we'll first focus on merit review from the perspective of a reviewer. This will give you a sense of what might be expected of you if you choose to participate as a reviewer. Understanding this process can also provide helpful information to guide your proposal writing. As a reviewer, you will gain a deeper understanding of the assessment process and how a proposal is examined to determine if it is ready for funding or not. In this sense, participating as a reviewer can really help you assess your own proposals and project designs. So once proposals are collected for a specific program, NSF program officers will identify the type of review necessary to determine which projects may move forward for suggested funding. An ad hoc, panel, or internal review, or some combination of these review strategies may be required depending on the type of program. The results of the review will then be assessed by the program officers for final recommendations to NSF divisional or office leadership. As you can see, reviewers are a critical part of the merit review process, as Jennifer also mentioned. Input from experts is a valuable resource to NSF. In general, NSF proposals are assessed based on two main criteria. And at this point in time, intellectual merit and broader impacts are the criteria used. When participating in a review panel, you will be asked to review a select number of proposals based on these criteria. Intellectual merit criteria focuses on how the proposed activity will advance the field of knowledge, and broader impacts criteria focus on the societal impacts, as Jennifer mentioned. For a deep dive into the history of the broader impacts criteria, you can check out a webinar from our colleagues, Drs. Trapani and Isaac. And to learn more about the current state of broader impacts, you can watch Dr. Aaron Lynch's webinar on broader impacts in the current research climate. Both of those webinars are available to you on the QEM Resource Hub linked on this slide. So how can you become an NSF reviewer? You can express interest through research.gov. From the research.gov homepage, you can navigate to the Volunteer to Review form from the section titled Reviews, Panels, and Meetings. We also have a link at the bottom of the slide, and we can add it in the chat, that will take you to the page shown here on the right. This page provides an in-depth look at frequently asked questions and how to sign up to be a reviewer. So from the research.gov volunteer page, you will be asked to complete a registration if you're not already registered. If you completed the research.gov reviewer profile prior to March 24th of 2023, you'll be asked to re-register to update your information. If you have technical issues with the site, which I did when trying this out, you can contact rgov at nsf.gov for IT assistance with the research.gov site. If you have an interdisciplinary background, you may find that there are multiple fields you can contribute to as a reviewer. For instance, I have a background in STEM workforce development and interdisciplinary research. So I've found I can contribute to discussions in a wide range of fields, particularly on the broader impacts criteria. When completing your profile, you can identify up to 5 areas of interest that you would like to be considered for when participating as a reviewer. We have the example of Jennifer's profile here to demonstrate the areas of expertise section. Program directors will have the ability to search these parameters to select reviewers for both ad hoc and panel reviews. So as I mentioned, there are 2 types of review that you may be asked to conduct as a volunteer. One is ad hoc review. This is generally to supplement panel reviews or to facilitate reviews for specific types of proposals. For instance, the ad hoc reviews can be used when several panelists are unable to evaluate a particular proposal due to conflicts of interest. Ad hoc review usually only requires that you review one proposal at a time. You can complete your review asynchronously, so there's no reimbursement for this type of review. Your final review will likely be included as part of a panel discussion to supplement panelist reviews. In contrast, when participating in a panel, you'll review several proposals and participate on specific dates for a 2-day review panel. The panels are currently virtual, and panelists receive a flat rate of $200 per day in compensation for their time. As a panelist, you will be assigned a role for each proposal. Each panelist is responsible for a written review of an assigned proposal, participating in the panel discussion, and providing comment on the panel summary draft. In addition to the review, the lead panelist is responsible for introducing the proposal with a brief overview to initiate the discussion. The scribe is responsible for drafting a summary of that discussion. submitting the draft for comment, and submitting the final summary to the panel host. Once you sign up to volunteer, if you are selected as a potential reviewer, you will receive an invitation from an NSF program officer for a particular program. If you decide to participate in a panel or as an ad hoc reviewer, you will receive training and instruction, including bias and conflict of interest training, that will help you through the review process. When reviewing proposals, you will be asked to use a scale rating each proposal as excellent, very good, good, fair, or poor, or somewhere between these rankings, such as excellent/very good. During a panel discussion the group will rank each proposal according to this scale. Based on the rankings, the panel will then categorize each proposal as high, medium, or low priority, or non-competitive. Depending on funding availability, proposals that are ranked in the high or medium priority categories are more likely to be funded. The number of proposals that move forward is also determined by the funding available. If funding is limited, even proposals identified as high priority may still go unfunded. A proposal in the NDP or non-competitive category may be missing critical information and deemed ineligible for review. These proposals will not be discussed during a panel. In this instance, no panel summary will be provided to the proposer, but they will still receive the reviewer comments. When participating in a review, you'll utilize the Panel Evaluation System, or PES, to input your summaries and rankings. PES replaced the FastLane interactive panel system in 2024. It can be accessed through the research.gov homepage under the Reviews, Panels, and Other Meetings section. Once selected as a reviewer, you'll receive instruction on how to sign in and complete your reviews. I've included a screenshot here of what you'll see inside of PES. I know the font is difficult to read, but the main sections are listed here on the left. So there are prompts for each section of the standard review, which includes a 2 to 3 sentence synopsis, an explanation of your overall rating, your assessment of the strengths and weaknesses based on the intellectual merit criteria, the strengths and weaknesses based on broader impacts criteria, any additional solicitation-specific criteria. Some solicitations have key topics that must be addressed. And finally, a summary statement. When evaluating, your rating should reflect the general tone of your review. For example, if a review is rated excellent, but there are far more weaknesses than strengths identified, you may need to go back and reassess the rating or elaborate on the strengths of the proposal. If you're participating in a panel, you'll have the opportunity to discuss key points of your review as part of that panel discussion. Again, if you're the lead reviewer, you'll be asked to provide a brief overview of the proposal. As the scribe, you'll be responsible for drafting the panel discussion synopsis and releasing it to the other panelists for feedback. Once all the feedback from the panelists has been included and revisions are complete, the synopsis is released to the host NSF program officer for final acceptance. Participating in the review process can provide you with an in-depth understanding of how NSF proposals are assessed. This can be invaluable information when devising your own proposals. I'll now turn it back over to Jennifer to take us through merit review from the perspective of a proposer.
Thanks, Sharmini, for that excellent overview of what it's like to be a reviewer. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about merit review from a proposer's perspective. I'm not going to cover everything about the entire experience. I'm going to focus a little bit more on like how do you address the merit review criteria effectively so that when you get to that point where your proposal is being reviewed, you're going to get feedback that's useful, or you're going to have a more competitive proposal. So we're going to start with that you found a funding opportunity and you want to apply to it, and you're thinking about how you're going to write your project description so that it's competitive. And one of the first things you might do is go to the Proposal and Award Policies and Procedures Guide, or the PAPG, which is basically the main document that tells you how to submit proposals and what needs to go into them. Any funding opportunity at NSF, the proposal submitted to them will have to follow this guide. Sometimes there are additional criteria for solicitations, and that's something that we talk about in our first webinar back in March. If you're interested, you can go to the QEM Hub and check that out. But in the PAPG, there are specific directions for writing a project description. And there are directions in different parts of the PAPG as well. But the first part that you'll probably encounter is going to be in the first chapter, where it's just outlining what all needs to go into your proposal. There's a lot of information presented in what the content of the project description should be, and it can be really overwhelming to read through it and the seemingly long and sometimes circular list of things you're supposed to account for. So we also know that our proposals will be judged by the merit review criteria, which includes broader impacts and intellectual merit once again. And I've highlighted the sections of this initial project description content instructions that you're going to come across, how they roughly correspond to each criterion. But it'd be nice if there was a little bit of an easier way to get started. So I'm going to walk you through some strategies for accounting for the merit review criteria while you're putting your project description information together, which is the main part of your proposal. So first off, we got to understand the process that our proposal is going to be evaluated under. There's several resources for this precise purpose that NSF has put together, and it's available on their website. We've kind of put them together here as well for easy access. The first link goes to the main page that explains the merit review process. They outline how they approach funding, as shown here in the screenshot, and they even have a brief cartoon that you can watch that explains the merit review process. I think it's about like 7 minutes long. It's a bit dated in the way that it's animated, but it is pretty entertaining and still informative. So check that out if you want to see like a video version of the merit review process. There's also a page on NSF's website that expands on 3 approaches to research that NSF supports in addition to fundamental and applied research. So if you're thinking about doing interdisciplinary, convergent, or transformative research, then you should familiarize yourself with how NSF defines those approaches. And if you're not sure if your work might fit into one of those approaches, you can check that page out and read what they define those approaches to be. Finally, as always, you're going to want to read the funding opportunity carefully for any specific requirements or stated goals that it has. So that's kind of like the intro background research. Then getting started on a project description can feel pretty daunting with all that information. There's a lot of instructions, so many directions, a lot of context that you have to place your work within. So it can be difficult to know where to start and whether or not you're covering the information that's going to make your proposal more competitive. So starting small can help make a big task like this feel more manageable. And one way to do that is to use structured questions to pull information together into a coherent framework. So we put together a 4-question process that can help you organize your project idea and place it within the larger context of your field and as well as society. So 1 and 2 are what will you do and how will you do it? And that's more just like, well, what is your project idea and how do you plan on actually, executing it? So you've got those 2. And then you've got questions 3 and 4, which are how does the work advance the field, which is essentially intellectual merit, and then how will society benefit from the work, which is essentially broader impacts. So those ones are much more broad questions that are harder to answer. So we've added some sub-question prompts that can help you answer those broader questions. So if you're looking at how the work advances the field, you can think about why is the problem important? How does it fit into previous work? What about your approach is promising? Or how you'll know if you're succeeding? And also, is it feasible? If you're looking at how society could benefit, You can look at questions that are a little bit more specific, like what are the outcomes you're expecting? Who do you think those outcomes could impact in the short term and the long term? What happens if the problem isn't addressed? And how will you draw interest to your work? So, in addition to this, I do want to point out too that our colleagues, Drs. Quincy Brown and Tori Rurlock-Smith, also recently did a webinar on writing one-pagers that has lots of helpful tips on telling the story of your idea. And one-pagers can be a really great way to build a foundation for your full proposal. Sometimes they can be a great way to field your idea to the relevant program officer if you're not sure if your idea fits the funding opportunity. And sometimes they're actually a required part of submitting to a program. So there's that link up there to the Art and Science of Writing one-pagers if you want to check out the information that they provided there. And then there's also another one that got done recently by our other colleagues, Drs. Carrie Hall, Janae Jenkins, and Chaz Gibson. They actually did one where they presented on focusing your agenda and assessing the fundability of your idea. And it's got a ton of awesome tips for taking big ideas and turning them into tangible aims and outcomes. So if you're looking for some more direction on how to do that part of it, that one is a great one to check out. In addition to those, I imagine that many of you also have a wealth of strategies for writing project descriptions or how you approach addressing the merit review criteria. So if you have any particular strategies you'd really like to share with the group, please share them in the chat now. Give people a few minutes to write any strategies they may have in the chat. I know it might take a minute to write a suggestion like that up. Thanks for sharing that one, Tarina. So Tarina shared a book that talks about a framework for messaging and communication. And if anybody else thinks of any ideas that they want to throw in there in the chat, just do it at your leisure. I'm going to go ahead and keep moving along here for now. And then the final thing that I just wanted to say, and this kind of builds off of the suggestion that Tarina put in the chat, is doing an exercise where you're breaking this down into a smaller, more manageable, like shorter write-up can help you find through lines in the research idea that you have so that you can tell a story about your work and its importance to your field and your society, because it's that kind of storytelling component of how you present your work. And then in addition to that, making sure that what you're presenting is feasible, that helps people who are reviewing your work to get an idea of like what you're trying to do and what the importance of it is without them having to figure it out themselves. Okay, so I think per the history that I talked about earlier with merit review criteria and how it's evolved over time, one of the things that The institutions have even struggled with how do we best make sure that this is getting addressed? How do we communicate with the research community how they should be addressing this in their proposals is the broader impacts criterion. And even in the most recent report that was released by the NSB, they specifically addressed the lack of clarity around guidelines for writing and reviewing broader impacts and are calling for improvements to those guidelines. They're also recommending a shift away from calling it broader impacts to societal benefits, so that it gets a little bit more of the broader look of things that could actually be societal benefits from a research project. So we're waiting for potential updates to the merit review criterion from that report. Right now, we're just working with the guidelines that we currently have available to us. And to that end, we put together this list of resources to help navigate the current environment around addressing broader impacts in proposal writing. So this first set of resources is more about looking at how you understand where your work fits in the larger picture of agency priorities. So that's going to help bring context to where your work may fit in that larger picture. The agency priorities usually reflect societal priorities. It's a little bit weird right now, but you can talk to your sponsored research or programs office if you have one. That's one way to key into agency and institutional priorities. You can also go to the NSF page that lists what their current priorities are, and they have an associated FAQ there as well for some commonly asked questions. NSF has also released a tip sheet for how to write broader impact statements, so you can check that out. And sometimes even these agency and institution specific resources aren't enough to understand the current sociopolitical landscape around merit review criteria that your proposed work is going to be subject to. So I put together several resources. Some are presentations. Note the first two, which were also mentioned by Sharmini earlier on, that will help kind of make it more clear what the current environment is and how to still address these criterion effectively in that current environment. Then I've got a couple more after that that are talking about how people may need to shift the way they address broader impacts. So that'd be definitely the webinar that Dr. Erin Lynch did on critical updates. And then University of California, Davis has a post on changes to broader impacts priorities in 2025 and what that means. Then after that, there's two general resources, the Broader Impacts Toolkit, which is a collaboration between Advancing Research Impact in Society, ARIS, which was formerly the National Alliance for Broader Impacts, or NABI. And then Rutgers University also worked on that with them. And then finally, the one cool thing I forgot to mention about the toolkit is that it actually has a broader impacts wizard. So you can go and actually get some guided help on how do I do this for my project? And then the final one is Arizona State University. They have a whole list of resources for broader impacts specifically. All right, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so that's kind of where I'm ending that portion of it. Top three takeaways for this presentation. We hope you got that the merit review process is something that has been evolving over time, but the main tenets of assessing proposed research through peer review on its technical merits and its importance to society have been pretty constant. And then also that NSF merit review process has consistently been the benchmark for peer review nationally, but also internationally. That participating in this process as a reviewer can help you understand the process and often leads to better proposal writing. And we definitely need to see an increase in diversity in people who are reviewing proposals at NSF. And that's also something that is called for in the NSB report, the Changing Landscape one that we've mentioned a few times. And then lastly, knowing the resources that are available to you can help you navigate the proposal writing process more effectively. So here's some key resources for both reviewers and proposers, and you'll have access to these slides through the resource hub, and you can feel free to peruse them at your convenience. Then we're here to help at no cost, so please reach out to us if you have any specific questions or if you want to talk about a proposal that you're writing and want some advice. We'd be happy to walk you through proposal writing processes or any other assistance you might need. There's also some QR codes on this page, one to the QEM events page, one to the Heroes webpage if you want to see what heroes are servicing your region of the country and what our areas of expertise are. And then there's also a webinar feedback form QR code here. So if you have the time, we'd love to hear from you on what was useful about this, what can be improved, or things you'd like to see in the future. And then finally, I also know that with how fast everything is changing right now, particularly for federal funding, I put together a little like timeline starting from last fall through now of some major things that are happening specific with funding to NSF, but it also does talk about some other agencies like NIH, and DOE and DoD. So feel free to use this as a resource to just have a better understanding of what's going on with the federal funding landscape. And yeah, I think we're at question portion of this presentation.
Thank you
If you
so
have
much.
questions, please put them in the
Sorry.
chat. Sorry, Christine.
Talking over you, Jennifer, and we were both saying the same thing. So if you have questions, you have a few ways of asking them. You can use the Q&A box. You can use the chat, which is open to everyone, or you can raise your hand to come off mute. And don't be shy. We are here to take your questions. If I may start off, what is your sense of the shift from broader impacts to societal benefits, the logic behind that shift, and what that might mean for proposers? Because I can see, a traditional broader impacts statement looking to, okay, we're increasing collaboration with local K through 12 institutions. That seems like a broader impact that can be scaled. A societal benefit, how would that be reframed?
Do you have any comments on that, Sharmini, or do you want me to start?
Go
Okay.
ahead. Sorry.
So I think the trouble that has been happening, at least in the past, is that they're just not, there's always been this kind of background of like, is the research that's getting funded like beneficial to society? And like there was kind of like from like the beginning, this definite focus on like the intellectual merit, like, is it worth funding? Like that was the first question. But then, you know, they started just kind of thinking more about like these, non-technical factors of like, well, like what's the return on our investment kind of, but also, just like what's going to help society, especially when you have to make decisions on like what to fund versus not, when you have more things that are worth funding intellectual merit wise, but what's also going to be like good for society, right? And, that's kind of been like a long shift over the time where it's gotten to the point where when we went down to the two criteria of like intellectual merit and broader impacts, what was supposed to happen is they were supposed to be considered equally. But in practice, what was being found was that that's not really what was happening. The focus was still mostly on intellectual merit. And part of that was because of just lack of clarity around what is supposed to be a broader impact. Like, at like what level, kind of like to the point that Christine was at in her question asking. And I think that's kind of where we're at now, is this phase of like, how do we change the way we're asking people to explain what their broader impacts are in a way that's not so daunting for people. Like, just like, yes, every single research project has to change the world. Like, that's not really a realistic expectation either. And so I think some of the changes in the way that the directions for both reviewers and then for proposers is going to change going forward, if we get those changes officially done, is going to be more specific on like, you know, it doesn't have to be like this massive thing. It can be an incremental like impact as well. And then also being able to the point I made earlier about knowing what your institutional priorities are as well as the agency's priorities can matter too, because if you can place your work within the work that your institution is doing, or like if you've got institutions you're collaborating with and like what the impact is of your project within that larger impact, that's also part of broader impacts. And I think, they seem to feel, at least from what I read in the report so far, that societal benefits was a better way to explain that to both the society that we're communicating, hey, this is worth doing or spending money on, as well as like providing a little bit more like clarity on like I don't know if it's really clear for the proposers, but it's definitely supposed to be a little bit more transparent for like people looking at like what is NSF doing and how are they funding it? Okay, societal benefits, that's a good thing for us to be considered. I don't know that like a lot of people in the general public really understand what broader impacts means. So that's my very long-winded answer to that question. I don't know if I made that more confusing or more clear, but if anybody's got follow-ups to that, feel free to ask.
Thanks, that was very helpful. And we actually have some good questions in the chat right now. First from Remy, on what basis are proposals said to be placed in high priority or low priority? How is that determined?
So, I'll take that. We have within the panel reviews in particular, um, you are, as part of the discussion, going through those two main criteria, the intellectual merit and the broader impacts, and looking at these, discussing the strengths and weaknesses of each proposal, based on the project design, the institutional capacity for producing the results, that project is proposing, and the background of the people on the panel are assessing the uh, the potential impact of expansion of knowledge within the field of those proposed activities. And then on the broader impacts, it can be looking at things like uh, outreach impacts, how well structured the attempts at outreach or mentorship are developed. So, really in detail of what the outlined activities are for both intellectual merit and broader impacts, and then evaluating the strengths and weaknesses of each of those to determine where each proposal will fall within that panel, whether it's high priority or low priority. I hope that helps.
And a really interesting question here. Do you feel like there is any shift from proposals that focus on basic science to necessitating translational science?
I mean, I think there's still plenty of basic science funding happening. I think in terms of at least what I've seen thus far, even over the past year, that hasn't really changed because that's like a key part of what NSF does. And I think it's more about like developing new programs. Like certain programs are going to focus more on that translational science, and other programs are going to focus on the basic science. So both of them are still there. Um, and I don't think that's going to change. I mean, right now, our biggest change is just that they're not funding as much as they have in the past. And that's a function of a lot of different factors going on right now. And it's kind of hard to know where that's going to go into the future.
Yeah, and there was a shift away from the division structure to more of a directorate focused structure, and that is um, part of the intention is to focus on basic science in many of the directorates, but we also don't want to lose the potential that some of the program solicitations had in developing interdisciplinary research. So based on the directorate level, you may see even more of a focus on basic science.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
that's a really good point, Sharmini. Thanks for bringing that up.
And from David, do collaborative proposals involving multiple institutions get better reviews than individual proposals?
No, I think it's more context dependent than that. So it really just depends on what you're doing. Like if what you're doing is feasible within the institution that you're at, like even if you're then as long as like you outline, you address that merit review criteria well, and you're addressing what the funding opportunity is calling for, then it shouldn't make a difference. And I haven't seen that happen in the past. I mean, there can sometimes be opportunities that are encouraging more collaboration, but that doesn't even necessarily have to happen like between institutions. Sometimes they're just encouraging collaboration between disciplines or between sectors. So those are things where, once again, it's more about what is the funding opportunity calling for, and is that something that you're addressing effectively?
And from you, How. I already submitted my application to volunteer as a review panelist, but I have not yet received an invitation. Could you advise on how I might better position myself for future opportunities?
I think one way, if there is a directorate that you're particularly interested in or an area of research that you're interested in, you may be able to research a specific program or program officer that might be available for contact and may have some suggestions. Um, I don't know, Jennifer, if you have
I
any.
mean, I was just gonna say, I think part of it just depends on, like what program they're doing panel reviews for and what they're evaluating because and I think making sure that you volunteer to review in the research.gov system is the first major step because at least, from my experience, they're taking from the pools that they have available to them. So that if they don't know, like they don't know about you, then it's harder for them to go out and, add more people. So they're always trying to add more people to their list of people. And that's part of the reason why I think some of the changes happened to those systems. Like because before they used to have like research.gov and you submit everything in, and then there was Fastlane and there's a bunch of stuff done there. And so they've just kind of put this all into one piece and made it a little bit more streamlined for people to have a profile that can be both used for proposing, but then also like if they want to volunteer to review, you're now in that pool of reviewers because that's something I know they've been working on is trying to like expand their reviewer pool.
And we have a suggestion in the chat. I suggest reaching out to the program officers
Yep.
directly. It worked well.
hmm Yeah. And that's kind of what Sharmini was just saying too. Like if there's like a directorate or program that you're interested in reviewing for because you've got relevant expertise, like let them know because they're always looking for people.
Yeah.
Well, thank you
I,
both so much.
I do want to address the question that's in there. I want to remind our participants that our heroes are not
Yeah.
currently working at NSF or any of the other agencies. And the question that was asked was about HBCU Up. And what I want to do is just refer you to the agency page. Um, and so sorry, I thought I was
Yeah,
gonna,
I was just gonna say something about that too,
yeah.
Tarina. So good that you're pulling that up.
Yeah, so here's the agency page. And basically what it's saying is that they're currently waiting for a new publication. These are the previous guidelines. And so I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, we're not uh, NSF is still trying to figure out how they're basically dividing their money amongst the programs that are existing. And so some of them have launched their new stuff and some haven't. So I would always refer to the NSF, the actual website for that kind of information. So as you can see here, no upcoming due dates, but these are the previous guidelines. So, and once again, it's always very important to try to talk to the program officer if possible, but they do have a general inquiries here. So just wanted to share that.
Yeah, Tarina's right. Like, definitely, if you have a question about a specific program, look at their website for that program first. it should have, whether it's active or not. If it says it's active and it's accepting proposals. If it says something like that where there's no current due dates, then it's in some flux process right now. And if you want, you can email whatever contact they have for that program for more information. And they'll give you what information they can give you. But my experience is that they are pretty good at responding to people. So yeah.
And Jennifer, you used to monitor one of those inboxes
I
too, didn't you
did. I
know?
did.
Pretty good at
We
responding.
we had a pretty lo I had a pretty lofty goal though. I tried to respond to people within like, a week of them emailing us. Like
So
or
now you know how committed the program offices are to
yeah.
you.
So, but I also like that was like one of my main responsibilities. And right now they are much more stretched thin. So, like I would say too, like if you do reach out and you don't hear back from someone like in a week or two, like feel free to reach out again and just make sure you're just, you know, making them know that you understand they're under a lot of stress as well. So, because my experience from being there, and Sharmini, you can let me know if it's been yours too, is that the program officers care a lot about what they do and they care about the scientific community and they want to be helpful. But there's been like a 30 to 40% reduction in staff at NSF in the past year. And so most of them they were overwhelmed before and now it's that much worse. So they're doing their best. So yeah, you may have to follow up. That could happen, but they will get to you.
Yeah.
And we are over time. Thanks for
Yeah.
this wonderful presentation, our Heroes Fellows. We hope to see you at a future webinar, and we hope you have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you so much for attending.